Okay. Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for showing up and exiting your self-quarantine for tonight. I am actually really pleased that so many have shown up, and I'm really pleased that we have such a spacious event venue in which I think we can feel quite comfortable holding this event. That being said, we will address the elephant in the room in just a second, but for now, my name is Alison Dittman. I'm from Foresight Institute. If you're interested to stay up to date on our events, please go to bit.ly/Foresight News. We do 3 types of events. We do technical competitions, we do private strategy meetings, and we do those public educational salons. All of those are focused on selectively advancing beneficial technologies toward positive futures. The technologies that we focus on are AI, biotech, and nanotech, and the causes that we focusing on are human health and planetary health. So this one is quite dear to our heart. All right, feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I think I've been in touch with most of you already via email, so don't be shy. Please write me. All right, so tonight, let's see. Tonight we are at Longevity Investment Takeoff. What's different this time and what's missing? And I think, you know, it's always quite almost like platonic to say, well, those people don't need an introduction. But, you know, given the fact that we really have a few people here that have been quite instrumental in actually like kickstarting the whole field, I think it's quite true this time. Nevertheless, I want to point out why I'm personally quite excited to have you guys on board. And I think let's start with Aubrey maybe. So Aubrey de Grey, I think one of the first things I think that was really striking to me was that actually you started out in computer science, right? And then someone told you, oh no, actually, you know, we may actually be able to do something here in longevity, and you're like, bam, pivoted. That is completely wrong. How is it? Yes, someone pass him the sterilized microphone.
Might be not. Oh, that's better.
Yes.
That's better. Right. Yeah, no, that's completely wrong. What happened was I always thought that something could be done about longevity, and then somebody who ought to have known, namely my now ex-wife, told me that no, we couldn't do anything about aging, and anyway, it wasn't even very interesting. And I was completely horrified, and I found out that it wasn't just her, it was basically all biologists that I was coming across, and indeed pretty much everybody else in the general public. And I thought, well, fuck this. I better actually switch fields, really, because the reason I was working in computer science in the first place was humanitarian, right? I thought, well, okay, I'm a really good programmer, which I had established in my teens, and therefore what I should do is I should use my skill at that to solve the problem that it's most appropriate to out of the big problems for humanity. And of course, the big problem in question was the problem that we all have to spend so much of our time, or most of us do, doing stuff that we would not do unless we were being paid for it. So we need more automation, right? And of course, people are still working on that with some success. But I always knew perfectly well that the problem of aging was far bigger, far more serious than the problem of work.
Well, and now actually you're at a point where in Hamburg, like the tiny little suburb where I live in Othmarschen, my mom sent me a photo of you hanging out there from some political party that's using you as their poster child for their healthcare advertising.
Yeah, it's always great being called a child. You know, it's a badge of. It's like having pimples, right? You know, teenagers get them. I get them still, and it's a badge of honor for someone who's age 56. It's great.
All right. Well, thanks, Nils. Did you see that as well in Hamburg? It's like always faces everywhere. It's hilarious.
For you. But, no, seriously, there was elections in Hamburg, and he was on a poster. Unfortunately, I think the party I voted for you. The party only got, I think, 0.1 or 0.2%. But there was actually, I don't know, they were pretty smart. They put one in front of my office, like literally downstairs.
Well, if it arrives there, I think we're really on a good track. All right, Sonia. Sonia is on our board at Foresight Institute, and that's obviously not the only thing what she's doing. She's written a really fantastic book on 100+ on basically how the coming age of longevity will really kind of like revolutionize most fields that we care about, and has now started 100 plus capital, which is really quite practically the reason why we're all here, because Sonia has agreed to sponsor this salon series, and this is only one of 4 different salons that we're going to be doing on this topic this year, and we're going to say a little bit more about that in a second. But perhaps if you want to introduce what 100 Plus Capital is up to.
Sure. 100 Plus Capital was the outgrowth from my book. So I wrote the book. Aubrey, I saw you speak a long time ago. Now that we're sort of bringing this up, how we all got into this. I mean, I was always interested in longevity, but I remember seeing you speak years and so many years ago, before anyone really knew who you were. You were at Stanford giving a talk to some small group of.
Was it a Foresight Vision Weekend?
No, it wasn't Foresight. I can't remember who it was, but I remember seeing you and going, "Wow, that guy's crazy," but I love what he's saying. And anyway, around the same time, I was thinking about the topic as well, and came up with the book 100 Plus, which became a bestseller. And then I took a bit of time off and started a company and sold it, and then came back and was going to write another book. But I realized what the world needed wasn't another book. The revolution had already started, and it was in full motion. And what really needed to happen was people to help longevity companies come into being. And so I decided to dedicate myself to doing that instead. And so now I'm spending my time investing in longevity companies and mentoring them and helping them along the way.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sonia. I think it's a really fantastic venue, and I can't wait for the follow-up salons already. Then we have Joe here, and I think Joe has been quite the luminary in our community as well. Yes. It's been really quite, I think, to me, quite kind of birthing of my kind of like hope in longevity, attending your health span salons, and I think you've been bringing together like the community in really amazing ways, and with a few companies focused and really founded at those meetings. So I'm really happy to have you here as this like nexus in our community. And then Karl, who's going to kick us off in a second with his presentation. And I think once I saw his spreadsheet, who here has already seen Karl's spreadsheet that he's going to present later? Okay, then your others are in for a treat. He's going to review that in a second. And I think I've rarely ever seen someone do such diligent spreadsheet work and then open source it for the benefit of us all. So he's basically reviewing a bunch of longevity companies on there, and including conferences and so on and so forth. So thank you so much for that community service. And then Nils, last but not least, I'm excited that you're here, not only because you're from Hamburg, yes, which is giving me a lot of hope for Hamburg, but also because just having read up on Apollo, it's really quite an audacious and ambitious project, and I'm really happy that you're bridging the European and the US divide, and I cannot wait to hear a little bit more from you about the intersection of Europe and US investing. Okay, so now to all of you that you know a little bit about the speakers, who here has been to a Foresight event before? Raise your hands. Okay, then who hasn't been here? Raise your hands. Great. So the ones who have been here, please take the ones who haven't been at a Foresight event by the wherever you can grab them in a non-awkward, airborne way, and guide them through this process, because those events really are quite interactive. So I encourage you, by all means, to speak up whenever you'd like, really. And with that in place, now that we all know each other so well, let's talk very quickly about the elephant in the room, right? So coronavirus-19 safety. So I think many of you here have gotten those little disinfectant wipes, those disinfectant gel, and I actually made it myself last night. 4 hours long I spent on making the different, mixing the alcohol with the aloe gel, filling it into those tubes, and some of them even have copper on them. So please feel free to use them now. Feel free to sanitize your hand with them whenever, especially before touching food later on, and don't be shy to run to the restroom and wash your hands. I think especially before touching food, that would be much appreciated. I think an obvious one, avoid touching your face, nose, eyes, and so on. This is incredibly hard once you start thinking about it. And then, the awkward one, if you have to cough or sneeze, I think this is always a hilarious one to watch these days. Then please do so away from others, maybe in your left armpit, if you have to, or the antiviral Kleenex wipes that we have out there. All right, then social distancing, I think, is likely to be the unword of 2020. Why don't we instead call it, use our beautiful space? We have a pretty spacious venue here, so feel free to use it. And then, what I've already seen, quite nicely presented by our panel, the elbow bumps and awkward waves instead of handshakes that have been going around already. So this is just a few kind of like initial suggestions. If you feel strongly about others, please shout them out. I'm happy to talk about coronavirus all day long. I just did my housemate prep for this. But I think for now, in the interest of moving on, I just want to say two things to that. I know that a lot of conferences, especially international ones, have canceled. I think we are a local community. Not only that, we're also a local community in which a lot of people already trust each other. And we are a local community in which we have a lot of health experts actually present here. So I'm really happy that we can do this as a kind of prototype of how we can perhaps reliably and I guess responsibly interact with each other without panic, and on the other hand also without kind of like just brushing it off. So I'm hoping to test run this. That only works if you're open about speaking out when something bothers you, and let's gamify the whole thing. So I already offer up that whenever I touch my face, feel free to point it out, and you get a Foresight sticker for whenever you shout it out when I touch my face here on the panel. All right, so if I trust any community to handle this responsibly, then it's you guys, but let's all be mindful and quite open about this, okay? All right, cool. With that being said, I couldn't resist, but maybe some of you have seen the slides, the age of coronavirus deaths. This is from the 29th of February, and it is data that was extrapolated from Chinese data, but you can really clearly see how it drastically skews for older folks. And I think this is a very good segue actually into today's topic, right? I don't know if any of our speakers already wants to take a stab at either supporting or in objecting my claim that actually I think if we had done the longevity investment that we're about to really be kicking off much earlier, then this number may actually be much lower for many age-related folks. Yeah, any objections here, or am I preaching to the choir?
I mean, it's a table that's made up of chronological ages, not biological ages. So if you just fast forward a while, a lot of people who are 80 may still be lowered biological age. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think, speaking specifically to Alison's point, the question is, could we, over the past decade or more, have moved faster in the science of rejuvenation of the immune system? In other words, could we have more people around today who had younger immune systems, even if we couldn't really call them fully rejuvenated comprehensively? And actually, I think the answer is yes, because we understand the immune system still only very poorly, but we understand quite a lot about what is different between an old immune system and a young one. And we're pretty close right now to being able to fix those things. There are not just projects in academia, but actually companies out there pursuing the most promising approaches to that. And of course that means that if that work had been supported better in the past decade, then it would be further along by now. It'd be already in the clinic.
All right, so
I'm going to counter you, Aubrey, and which I know is not the conversation you really want to have, but I don't think we could have moved faster, to be honest. I mean, it all depends on what you mean. I mean, if scientists got more money and they could have hired more researchers, yes. But society just wasn't ready for it yet. I mean, which is why I wrote 100 Plus when I did, because we needed more people to come on board with the idea that we can actually move forward with extending health span. So we couldn't have, I mean, I can't imagine any way if you could go back in time and just throw a whole bunch of money that it would have moved. I mean, maybe the science would have moved faster, but society might not have.
Depends on presentation.
So, anyway.
Yeah, no. And I think actually that's, again, a nice segue into... Slides are loading. All right, well, what's on here, basically, you're not missing much out, because it's basically a clusterfuck that I created about all of the different longevity events that we've been doing over the few years. And I think one of the ones that we did on longevity myth busting last year, where we actually went through a lot of the myths that I think still needed to be bust, actually randomly just immediately hit very quickly 18,000 views. I was like, oh my God, people still really need kind of like their bubble burst in that way. But we've been doing technical meetings at first, and then really kind of like more public education events, and I was like super impressed and kind of surprised by how much interest there was for those meetings, and by how many people really kept on pestering me on like, we need more of those. And I think kind of like focusing in a really directed manner on this now this year is kind of nice. So this is, for people that have been attending Foresight events, something that we like to do. I already sent out a form to you. This is the submit your info form. That's the form that you should have received via your email address earlier today. So please take a moment to fill out that form that's under that link. That will then populate a shared spreadsheet that we can use in the breaks to help us find the people that you actually want to, that you really want to be talking to, and then actually also follow up with those folks. And we'll be using the same spreadsheet over the next 3 or 4 meetings, so that we can actually grow the community substantially, and you can follow up. All right? Okay, good. So don't put any too private data on there, but also put data on there that you actually want, where others can like poke you out and be like, oh, actually, that's a connection that I wouldn't have made otherwise. Okay, great. With that being said, this is the program for tonight. We're already in the panel. We're going to have a break after the panel in which you can connect with the folks using the spreadsheet, or you can actually just talk to someone in person. That's also still available. And then we're going to have a round of amazing lightning talks at the end of it. Okay, so basically what we're going to be doing now, Karl is going to kick us off with a little spiel on like what is actually different now in the longevity industry. Then we're going to be discussing a little bit about our own perspectives. And after the break, we actually see a few, I guess, like projects that really make some claim or that put some meat to the bones of the theory that we'll be discussing of what's actually changed in longevity. Okay, does that sound good? Karl, without much further ado, I'll get your presentation running, and then you can kick us up. Thank you so much for joining us.
Do you want to just
if you want.
do I just go forward one? You find it. I don't think I've ever been at an event like this where you have to go underneath the presentation to get more alcohol.
Yeah.
I'm Karl Pfleger. I run a website called Biotech.info, which was up there. There we go. Thank you, Allison. If I want to do a live demo, can I pull up another tab? Or I don't have to. I don't have to.
We can try it out.
Okay, I don't have to. I did a little video just in case. Okay, so I run this website, Biotech.info. It doesn't work great on mobile browsers, but you can go there, and it kind of just the interactivity doesn't work. But so if you want to do this on your phone while I'm talking, it won't the sorting and restricting won't work. But so I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes very quickly. I'm going to give you about half of it's going to be here's what this tool is and why you can use it to hopefully help your work in this field, and about 5 minutes on the view from this tool of the topic of this salon. Well, right here is the takeoff. We don't have a separate pointer. I could just point. When I did my PhD, this is how pointing worked. There was no pointers. So here's the takeoff. Looks like a takeoff. What's new? Well, what happened here? This graph is a graph of the number of companies founded each year over the past 10 years that are specifically aging or longevity companies, which roughly means what they're going after, either as a therapy or a diagnostic, underlies multiple age-related diseases. So clearly something has changed in recent years. What is that? So I'm going to talk a little about that later. And then what's missing? Well, this is roughly a whole map of the whole field, and there's a bunch of space that's missing. So let's get into that at the end very briefly. So. At its core, the website's most important content, the theme of this website is to organize information in the field, not in blobs or paragraphs of prose, as most of the books and blogs in the space do, but in tables, which is sometimes difficult to do, but allows for some interesting broader perspective. So you don't have to take a photo of this slide. This is a long table. There's 134 companies on it and growing. That's more companies than most people I talk to realize exist in the field. And this spreadsheet aims to basically give you a snapshot view where you can get a very, very quick overview. Each company is summarized in one horizontal row, and you can see this goes to about the middle of the C's, so it's a big table. The interesting and important part about this being a table, and it's just basically powered by Google Spreadsheets on the bottom, is that you can sort and restrict. So instead of doing a live demo, I'll just show what that looks like. A lot of people who get to the website, I guess, don't realize in the upper left-hand corner, when you click on the company's link, will be a how to use this table. Click on that and you'll get a lot more details. But the basic operation is you can go to any column or go to any column you want, and you can sort or restrict by values. Let's say we want to find all the companies working on senescent cells, doing something with senescent cells. So you can go to the hallmarks category. There's a category for hallmarks. There's a category for Aubrey's 7 SENS areas, and then there's a broader category that calls out separately some other things. So we just restricted to only the senescent cells by clearing all the values, and now we're going to say, let's just only look at companies that do biomarkers or diagnostics for senescence. So here's 3 of them. All we had to do is select DX, short for diagnostic, and then there's all the different information you can find about them. But what if we want to do the therapeutic companies? So as another example, we'll switch it to, you click on these little triangle things, and that's what lets you do various restricts. So it's very powerful. You can zoom in on any part of the field you want. So here's all of the therapeutic senescent cell companies, and now we can do things like sort by what clinical trial phase they're in. In the case of senescence, that's not so interesting because there's only one non-preclinical. Most of them are preclinical, and then there's Unity and phase 2 trials now. So just as a second very, very quick example, let's say you wanted to find all the companies that have epigenomic methylome clocks that are offered direct to consumers. So go back to the company's link to reset the sort. We'll sort by the aging Biotech.info company category, and then we just clear all the values and we search for methylome clock, click on all the values. Some companies do more than one thing, so there's sometimes different entries. There's all the methylome clock companies, and now we can clear the description field and search for DTC, click on all of those, and you'll see the 5 companies that are offering direct-to-consumer methylome clocks, one of which I believe might be defunct now. So anyway, that's basically how you use the site. That's the most important basic operation. Play with the data. Hopefully you'll get something useful out of it. I think it's a nice tool. All right, so what could that tell us? Another important thing to say about the data is, since it's a spreadsheet, counts, numerical data comes for free. So there's a tab on the bottom of the spreadsheet that gives you a bunch of counts that are kind of useful. They give you a quick overview. You can see things like which geographic areas have the most companies in the space, either by company count or by employee count. And you can see that this, of course, the San Francisco Bay Area is the biggest, but other obvious places like Boston and New York and San Diego pop up. You can do counts by all the different categories, by where they are in their clinical trials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the counts of companies founding is what gives you a sense of what's going on. So this is taking the past decade and expanding back to 2 decades, and you can still see that there looks like there's some kind of a takeoff. Recently, there's a little bit of an explosion of interest in the field. You can also break down the number of companies by the categories. So here's 4 different categories. The number of senescent cell companies is kind of going up. The number of mitochondrial companies is kind of going up. Biomarker companies, there's specifically aging biomarker companies, kind of more lately, kind of filter. And then a good counterexample is telomeres, right? So telomeres is sort of one of the older parts of the field, and the number of companies founded in that space has not been showing a recent explosion. Okay, so what's going on here? So I went and looked at the counts of just the companies founded in the recent years, and I tried to examine like everything that was different about that set of companies. So one of the interesting things to know is that if you look at just 2016 through 2019, that companies founded in those 4 years make up 54% of the 134 companies on the list, more than half. And the last 3 years, if you get rid of 2016, it's still 40%. So there's just really a lot of concentration recently. The biggest thing that jumps out of the data is that if you look at what percentage are in preclinical versus phase 1, 2, and 3, naturally you expect, and what you do find is that the newer companies are less far along in their trials. So that's not very surprising. The only thing that jumped out in terms of categories is senescence. So more companies that have been founded recently are doing cellular senescence, whether it's senolytics or senosuppression, senomodulation. Everything else was roughly the same. So in terms of what the geographies are, what they're working on, what clinical modalities they're doing, what regulatory pathways they're going through, it's just more of what was already out there. So I thought that was interesting. All right, so lastly, and then I'll finish, what's missing? So this is a new table that's not yet launched live on the website, but it's live, but it's not linked. So this is taking the whole span of companies and trying to put it into a single pipeline slide for the whole industry. Now, there's things that I left out because it would be too crazy big. Mostly, this doesn't include small companies that haven't really raised yet or only a couple people. And it doesn't include a lot of companies where the category, it's hard to categorize them exactly, or where they're doing very unbiased platforms like lifespan screens, so it's not clear what method of action they're going after yet. But we take the SENS categories and the hallmarks and expand them with some other specific things that don't, where there's just a lot of particular effort, for example, in NAD+, which I call out separately for that reason. And then what diagnostics do we have? What non-medical therapies, like supplements or things you don't need to go to your doctor to get? What available medicines? And then what's in clinical trials, phase 1, 2, or 3, so that's kind of coming faster, and what's still preclinical. And so you can quickly get a sense of where there's a lot of effort, right? There's a lot of stem cell regenerative medicine companies, there's a lot of mitochondrial companies, there's a lot of proteostasis companies, there's a lot of cellular senescence companies, and there's some clear gaps where we need better diagnostics and biomarkers. Question? Hallmarks of Aging is a paper that came out in 2013. It's another 9-category breakdown of the field of aging. It doesn't map exactly onto the SENS, but it's kind of close. And then, you can organize things in the field by either one of them, or by, and I basically, they're both, both of those and my own categorization, which basically just expands on them, are all in both the company table and this table. So I think there's some very interesting holes in terms of what's missing, especially in the diagnostic and biomarker side, where that would really help in assessing clinical progress. So anyway, there's lots of things you can, I'm done basically, there's lots of things you can quibble with about what's on the website. It's not by no means is every single piece of data there 100% correct, but it creates a way to get a picture that's a good jumping off point to do further research or investigation into any given area.
All right, well, thank you, Karl. That was pretty neat and fast. Yes, questions are allowed. I will be quickly, querying the panel on a few items, and then we're going to be moving into. What's a good one to stop it with? Yes. Look too carefully at the data. Yes. Yes, we're going to have Q&A in just a second. I think we would love participant questions. Or actually, is it a short one that's directly? How long the answer is? Yeah. All right. Shout it out.
So I guess I should say in terms of scope. So I'm not sure if I understand your question, but let me just say something important. There are other efforts vaguely similar to this. The Relief has a rejuvenation roadmap webpage, which tries to track kind of everything organized by hallmarks that's going through clinical trials or that's in preclinical stage. And they lump together academic research labs and research institutes like the Mayo Clinic together with companies. At the moment, the Biotech.info website is primarily focused on companies, for-profit companies. I do have a separate table on nonprofits that I just haven't launched yet. But the reason I focused first on the for-profit companies is because that was what was really lacking in terms of people knowing how many were out there. That was, it's pretty easy to find the academic labs and the Mayo Clinic and the Buck Institute and the other kind of big institutes where research happens. It was harder to find information about the companies. And also because basically there's a lot of important stuff going on at the research stage, but before the mass of the population starts using it, it will get into a for-profit company. So it's the way to monitor what's going on the way to actually everybody getting these therapies.
All right. Thanks so much. All right, I think you have some time to play with the tool in a little bit if you'd like, but if you want to jump right into I guess what the potential reasons are for why we see the takeoff according to you guys. Is there anything specifically that you think that has changed significantly, which may which may make sense of that recent peak?
Well, I mean, I started holding health extension salons in 2012, and then you see there's a steady increase right after that. So
I should have said.
I'm just saying.
I should have said, since people were attributing what got them into the field, it was a combination of Aubrey, who a friend pointed me to, and Joe's health extension salons that got me started.
Yeah, and I'm very possibly, yeah, or maybe the.
At your first salon.
Or maybe the first one that wasn't at my house.
Very incestuous group.
I should also credit Aubrey with making his organization making a donation to Health Extension to help it get off the ground. That was really useful in the early days. Thank you.
All right. Sonia, do you want to speculate?
Do you want to go? So you were asking why it's taking off now, and yeah, and why not before, right? Because this is sort of actually how we started out. That was the question. And I think there's a couple of reasons. Sort of the broad macro reasons is, one, the science is real now. And honestly, when I started writing my book was published in 2011, right before this all took off. Yeah, I was on book tour for a year. Do the math. So, when I was doing research for the book, a lot of the stuff that I was finding, a lot of it was snake oil, and a lot of it was real. And it took me a lot of time to figure out what was real and what was snake oil. And there really were real things. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been doing the book. But there was a lot of crap out there too. And so one of the reasons is that the real science was finally starting to take off. And we have real tools now to help repair people and extend the health span. And that's why people are excited, because it's real. It's not just promises and literary fiction and all that kind of stuff. And then I think the second thing is, there's more people over 65 than there are under age 5 now. The world is aging. And so this is, it's a global issue, and I think people are really interested in it.
Yeah. Nils?
Sure. We bumped into the field. I'm an investor by heart, and in the past we've picked up things pretty well in other areas as well. And we were just super excited. The science is real. Compared to tech, I think the valuations are very low, with a massive upside if things are working out well. And it's just a amazing field to be in and be involved in the field. And it just feels way more fulfilling than starting internet marketplaces or so. And we see it in our fund. Now we have pretty much from, I would say, 60% of the German venture funds, the GPs are investing in our fund, and then a lot of European guys do. and everybody's getting excited about that space, and that's what we also try to do, is educate people, get more people in the space, and fuel the ecosystem. We have, I think, 3-4 GPs from funds coming into our place, into our fund with that say, this space is super exciting. Please help us, please educate us. These are Lakestar is a $700 million fund, GFC, they have $3 billion cash. So I think the space is really about to explode. I mean, they're putting tiny tickets and want to do follow-ons in our fund from the companies, but this is what we do, and people are getting really excited. It takes some time to explain them. I think the hardest part is always getting somebody's attention for 30 minutes or 1 hour from somebody who's not into the space. But then, I think with 3 hours explaining, somebody is already excited about it, and time accumulates, and then people are getting excited.
Yeah, I think I agree with what everyone said, except actually I think that the demographic change that we're seeing globally, or even in the industrialized world, is not actually all that big a contributor to all of this, at least not at the level of the investors themselves. I always noticed way back before there was an industry, 10, 15 years ago, that we were not getting hardly any donations from people over the age of 60. The donations tended to come from people in the 30s and 40s and so on, and especially the high net worth people. And that seems still to be true, by and large, among investors these days. Very few investors who are significantly older than me. However, for sure, what everyone's been saying about the fact that the science has moved forward is the key thing. When we started to think about moving into, spinning projects out as startup companies from SENS, we were blindsided, actually. It was one of our donors who came to us in 2014, I think, and said, listen, this was a guy who would come to our lab twice a year and try and understand everything we were doing. And he was a major donor to us. And he just said, I think this particular project is ready for prime time. I want to take it private. I want to, make a company and take your people, and I'll give you 10% of the company, and I'll take your IP, and I'll run with it. And in the end, that particular attempt ran into the sand. But that didn't matter, because what mattered was that it completely changed our mindset on this whole thing. It made us feel that now was the time when we should start talking to people who were really more investor types than donor types. And sure enough, it's worked out. We've now spun out 6 companies, and it's obviously part of what Karl has been presenting.
I don't know whether what I'm about to say is true. It's just purely supposition, but I do wonder to what extent part of the difference, I think, Aubrey's point, it seems to be the young people who are more enthusiastic about this field, ironically, than the old people. And one of the things that's happened over the past decade is that entrepreneurs, notably in tech, have really changed the world in very, very many different ways. And that has created a perception that things that were always a certain way can actually be changed. And the perception that aging, which has always been a certain way, can't be changed is one of the things that I think held the field back from the thinking that it should have switched to a long time ago. And so in particular, a bunch of young people suddenly actually did change a bunch of things, and then they also had a lot of money. And so that created a desire to invest in a bunch of other world-changing things, of which Forsyth likes to highlight many, and this is one of the areas that I think possibly benefited from that kind of change in mindset, as well as money from the people who like that kind of mindset, entrepreneurial thinking.
Thank you so much. All right. Thanks for that. Thanks, Aubrey. By the way, this copper, oh my God, earlier tonight, I went to Discount Builders and got those copper tubes to put the microphones in. But of course, I didn't realize that if you put a microphone into a copper tube, nope, it won't work. So they are now nice. They are now very nice decoration here. But over there we have real copper, and at least you can put the microphone on it while it's not on. So this is all copper, and it's all pretty, but hopefully quite effective too. So here we go. All right, back to the topic. But Nils, I'm personally terribly excited. I don't know how many people here are from Europe originally. Okay, we have a few in there that maybe may mirror my excitement. I am thrilled that something like Apollo is coming out from Europe. Like super thrilled. I couldn't read up enough about it, and I know that you spent a lot of time here as well. But I'd be thrilled to know kind of like what do you think has changed, especially in Europe, and how do you think that the U.S. and the European landscape differs? Where could they be complementary to each other? I know that there's a big conference coming up in Berlin as well, if it's still going. But yeah, what's your opinion of the field? Give us a little bit of a scope of the land there.
I think it's two things. I think on the scientific side, Europe is way less entrepreneurial. We have people that work in the lab on something very specific, aging related for 7, 8, 10 years. And
they don't talk about it.
They don't talk about it. They don't think about starting a company. You need to push them to do that. While here, once they find something very small, they're very entrepreneurial and start something. Yeah. This can be an opportunity, but sometimes it can also be harder to work with these people than with people from the US who are entrepreneurial and know how to build a pitch deck themselves and pitch the company, etc. And then I think on the investor landscape, and we're actually trying to change that, as I just said, pretty much like a lot of the funds here on Sand Hill Road, they partly do biotech, and I think some of them are getting excited about it. Most of the biotech funds are looking at the space, and what we want to change is really, there is hardly any biotech funds in Europe. We wouldn't consider us as a very European fund because our partner Jens is in Boston. He has been there for 20 years, and he invested with every big biotech fund. But we want to, waken up the ecosystem because there is a lot of money also in Europe. And there's 140 companies on the list.
Do you think it's
consider there is 70 good in there, and they probably all need 25 million for proof. I would say that's not that much money. It's 2 billion. If you look at the SoftBank fund, they're wasting 100 billion on other companies, and this is exactly what we want to change. And we do our part in Europe, and let others, do their work here.
Yeah, so you think it's a lot about like going to the labs and actually tickling the scientists to wake up into this more like, I guess, like Silicon Valley entrepreneurial mindset and like actually getting them out there, or?
Find the science in Europe, but then also wake up the ecosystem and show investors with the money what kind of opportunity that is. Like
one thing that that I've talked to, with almost everyone here, maybe apart from you on the panel, just because I didn't know you back then, but was that kind of like there seems to be this gap between, there's often like a lot of like really incredibly good science in academia or even at our technical competitions, people come up with incredible results. Then there are also a lot of founders out there, entrepreneurs and residents who are searching for the new gig, and there are a lot of potential funders. So how can you kind of like close that gap where all three of them meet? So we want to do maybe like as a future salon something like a matchmaking between the three, and I would be interested to see, especially because you had also some companies coming out of the health extension salons. How did that work? Like, what do you think is missing? How can we actually create more companies that are applicable to funding?
Well, I think that was probably just the petri dish of Silicon Valley, for one thing. Yeah. Getting people who like to think entrepreneurially together in an environment where there's a scientist there talking about real science. The reason I started doing all of this is because almost all of the conversation, except bless your heart, Aubrey's SENS, was not really science. There was this multi-billion-dollar industry of things that were supposedly anti-aging that weren't really, like take more riboflavin or put this cream on that has something that doesn't actually make you younger or make you live longer. So I wanted to get more of a science discussion going. So we bring in a PI from Stanford who's all about aging, and that just creates the atmosphere in the room where people are thinking about actual science. And then you have all these entrepreneur types from Silicon Valley who are used to making startups in the same environment, and then it just works. I think it would be harder to do in Europe because there just isn't as much entrepreneurial energy there for some reason.
Would you agree with that?
I mean, I've been all over Europe, like at entrepreneurial events, mentoring people, helping people do startups, and it's just like 10 times harder. I mean, there are lots of startups that start there. It's just a lot harder.
One anecdote from me is always the Longevity Leaders event in London, and there's that event, and then there's the Longevity Life Science World Congress, and I was there. And that was kind of an eye-opener for us. We were there, and then everybody presented in front of the crowd for the longevity companies, for the other scientists, but then the next day everybody left. I was like, no, I mean, the investors are coming the next day, but the scientists are just presenting for themselves, which I think is different here.
Well, I think thanks for that. That was actually, quite myopically informative. I think about the European scene. But I'm really glad that it keeps on changing. And actually, I think with the upcoming Berlin event, I think that's a really good
By the way,
data
if
point.
anyone's worried, the Berlin conference, May 21st, 23rd, the plans are not changed. No.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
We've only had one cancellation so far.
Good luck in filling up 3,000 of those copper gel tubes, Aubrey. All right. Yeah, we'll see how it works. Okay, well, Sonia, I think one thing that has always been quite striking about I think your investments to me was that you take a pretty comprehensive approach to longevity, and that's probably informed by your book, right? And I would just be interested, maybe you could open up participants' eyes to are there any companies, if they're thinking about longevity companies, there may be a few that they're considering immediately, but are there any others that are just kind of making, that are paving the way for the longevity ecosystem on a much more holistic way that they may be blind to, that you want to point out to?
Right, yeah. So I take a much broader view of longevity companies than, say, Karl does. Karl is looking at specific, how does it map onto SENS or the hallmarks of aging, or, and he's looking at very specific, sort of anti-aging companies, which is great, and I'm glad you're doing that, and what you've put together is amazing. And I'm investing in those companies, but I'm also investing in companies that I see having a broader longevity impact. Obviously we need to repair our bodies and things, but there's going to be as we can live longer, there's going to be other things that we need to be thinking about. And I'm very interested in extending health span. So not just lifespan, but health span. And so if we're going to be alive for a long period of time, we have to make sure our food and water are clean. It's that's kind of basic, and I'm so horrified about how dirty our food and water supply is. I mean, if you take a look, you'll be horrified too. And so I'm focused on when I see companies in that space that I think, I'm not just funding food and water companies. I mean, I'm not broadly doing that, but if I see companies...
Actually, Guardian is presenting later.
Guardian is, and that's one of my investments, but that's an anti-aging company.
Yes.
But so for instance, I invested in Wild Earth, which is a food company, and they're making food out of fungi, and they started with dog food. So I guess I invested in a dog food company, and I have eaten it.
Ryan ate it in front of me.
Yes, I've eaten it, and it's incredible, actually. But before they put the dog flavoring in, it's you don't want to eat it after they put the dog flavoring in, but the product that they have before the dog, it tastes like a cracker, and you feel like you're eating carbs, and it's got more protein than steak. I mean, how incredible is that? And it's clean. We know exactly what happened to it, where it was. I mean, it's an incredible company that has a much longer term vision that I can't reveal to you, but it does actually have a longevity vision.
Knowing Ryan, I can
Ryan.
kind of...
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. And so those are the kind of companies that I'm investing in outside of the... in addition to the clear, anti-aging space. And also another area that I'm really interested in, and I've found some, interesting companies so far, and invested in one that's not on my website yet, but it will be. It's called Crate. Is mental health, because as we live longer and healthier lives, and we already need mental health companies, to be honest, but we're going to need them even more, and that's going to be super important. So I'm looking at things like that.
All right, great. And I think like piggybacking off that, I had let's call it a meeting, Aubrey, that we had the other day where, I tried to find out, okay, now that we're doing those, 4 salons really, like what are the most important topics that we could be focusing on and spending our time with. And so I've been going around a little bit, and like one thing that you pointed out to me was that while I think Karl and I were on board that, maybe we need more matchmaking between scientists and entrepreneurs and funders, and you were saying yes, and maybe we also need to think about how can we kind of wake up policymakers so that they can actually accelerate the trajectory that the longevity industry is then on. So thinking like a step further, and that fits quite well with I think the research that you've been doing for 100 plus, because it's this pretty holistic approach of like, what are good scenarios, what are good outcomes, how can we make this attractive for policymakers to further accelerate. So do you guys maybe want to take a stab at if there's anything that we should be doing on that front? No, you go for it. And then
Yeah, okay, so yes, I mean, I think, I'm guessing that the reason you put me last on the panel was because because you wanted me to speak about something that actually isn't really the main focus of tonight. It's not really the industry side of things. And I mean, I think that makes sense, because whenever you're in a crusade and you're trying to spearhead it, which I think we are, you've got to look what the next step is in order to make sure that you maintain momentum long term. And I believe we can sincerely say right now that the broadening of the longevity movement out from just being a movement that has a few non-profits that take it forward into being a genuine industry now has a momentum of its own. Yes, there's certainly more that we must continue to do to keep it on the straight and narrow, so to speak, to make sure that companies have the opportunity not to be, having to take the wrong kind of money and become too short-termist and be diverted away from the track that will deliver the greatest humanitarian benefit in the long run. However, to be honest, right now it's looking pretty damned healthy. Things are going awfully well. The explosion that we're seeing, and I mean, actually, the curve, or the trajectory of, number of companies founded each year that Karl put up, I was expecting it to be a bit more exponential than it was. And I think, if one defined what is a longevity company a bit more broadly than Karl chooses to, then it actually probably would be a bit more exponential. So yeah, I mean, it's going fantastically. And of course, the reason it's doing so is because not only is there a huge number of scientific projects that are reaching the point of investability, but also there's an equally, exponential growth in the number of investors who are realizing that this is the next big thing, and wherever they sit on the investor spectrum in terms of check size or what area they want to get involved in or whatever, and of course ranging across not only individuals but also institutional investors. I mean, it's no accident that we're having this meeting on Sand Hill Road, right? It's all exploding. So yes, we need not to take our eye off the ball, but we also need to be looking at what the next step is. And I firmly believe that the next step is to speak to policymakers and decision makers in the corridors of power. These are people who ought to have been paying attention to all of this since the beginning of time, but hey, we knew that. We knew that people don't do that unless they feel they should. And of course, the difficulty that we have with policymakers is that they tend to have one very clear goal in life, which is to get re-elected, and therefore there's only so much you can do until there is a perception that public opinion is shifting, which of course is reflected very strongly in the rise of the industry. So I believe now is the time when those of us who do have connections among policymakers, whether here in the US or elsewhere, are in a position to start having conversations with those people in which those people will not just, nod politely and say warm words, but will actually go away and think about what we said. I am delighted to say that we have, as our interim CEO right now, someone who is very well placed to play a role there, Jim O'Neill. Jim, yes, he is. I was kind of asking him to stand up, but he's 6'5", so he doesn't really need to. So Jim has been on our board of directors since the dawn of time, but during that whole period, he was focusing on venture funds and stuff like that within the Tealscape, Peter Thiel's empire. He was essentially founded the Thiel Foundation and was the right-hand man of Peter for a very long time. But before that, he worked on he worked in the Beltway. He was, I think, number 3 at the Department of Health and Human Services, and of course has a great network within the those people now. And we are already benefiting from the fact that he was available to be an interim CEO during our search for a permanent CEO, and has been using that position as a springboard with which to get policymakers more interested. He's been telling me recently that he doesn't really enjoy that as much as he enjoys fundraising and so on.
Okay,
let
other people be able to talk to Jim about that in private.
Right.
What do you think we should be doing on the policy front, if anything?
I think we should be just educating. Really, it's all about education. It's all about getting these people to see and to realize that not only do we know that this is not science fiction, but the rest of the world, people who actually have influence on their electability, are realizing that it's not science fiction. And so they damn well better realize it now as well.
All right, thank you very much. With that, Karl, while you want to comment, who here has an audience question? Let's take a few before we break for aperitifs. Any audience questions?
Well, let me comment just real quick.
Yes.
While everyone thinks of their questions. So sometimes people make analogies between what's happening in this field right now and the .com 1.0 time in tech in the 1990s. And one of the lessons there was that a lot of things happened at once. A bunch of people started companies. A core group of technologists knew something was happening before the wider public did and realized how big it was going to be. And it got disseminated slowly as you got more successes and things that people could use. And simultaneously, the lay public and the media got educated, and then the politicians paid attention. And one of the secondary effects was that you got more people going into the field in academia as undergrads. And I think that all is going to happen here. And the question is how to accelerate the process as fast as possible. And I think, like Aubrey said, education. And I think one of the things that would help is having a couple clear points that constantly get repeated every time. And one of the key points is the one he just mentioned, which is that it's not snake oil. The science really works. Yeah. It's actually possible to interfere in the aging process.
There's a positive way in which we can do that without reaching carrying capacity. I think that was the one that we talked about a lot. All right, as people are thinking about their questions, Gail has one, but as I'm bringing her the microphone, what's your number 1 tip for people right now to be mindful of when investing, which they may otherwise not hear if they wouldn't have come here tonight? You can speak now. Yes, I'm speaking all of you guys to answer.
I got this one from Reason, but it's pay attention to effect size. The size of the effect when you're looking at data on the early indications of how good the science is pay attention to the size of the effect. The thing about rejuvenation, actually aging reversal, is that you won't have to monkey around with small effects. If you have something that can really turn a 60-year-old into a 40-year-old, it's going to be very clear.
Maybe point out Reason's website.
Yeah.
Fightaging.org is a very good blog in the space, and the person who maintains it, whose name is Reason, he harps on the point about effect size, and I think it's one of the most important tips if you're looking at companies. Yep,
the science has to work, and it should be big. The thing that I think most people probably, if they're investing for the first time or something, maybe they're not thinking about, or if they're looking at something and they think, hey, this would be a great investment, I'm gonna tell Sonia about it, the team really matters. And so, I see tragedies every day, actually, unfortunately, where like there's some amazing technology and it's incredible and it would change the world, but the scientist doesn't want to give it up and he's holding it really tight and doesn't want anyone to help him because he knows how to run the business, and it's just not going to work. And I know it's just going to sit there for 20 years until somebody else discovers it and gets a good team, and then it'll hit the public. And that's a tragedy for me. I mean, that kills me every time. I just saw it yesterday. It kills me. And so the team really matters. And so if you're involved in bio in some way, try to help people understand that, like, if you've got some great invention, it's not great if it just sits on a shelf and doesn't get disseminated to the public and actually used. Right? Maybe my mental health company will help.
I would say for people that are new to the space, invest with sophisticated investors. If you think you found something nobody else is investing, I mean, show it around, build a syndicate, don't invest alone.
How do I add to that? I'd say try to go for, a lot of the investors that are going into this space are from the tech community and they don't really know much about biology or traditional biotech investing. So they're, a lot of them, this is a sort of a general thing about what's happening in Silicon Valley right now with respect to bio, is that a lot of non-traditional bio people are getting into the space. And since we're made of biology, this applies. Maybe that's a bias. But I think that if you try to do a company that has a small effect size or tries to slow down aging a bit, even though that would be huge if you did. Unfortunately, to do that, you have to make some extremely non-toxic, perfect drug that someone could take every day or whatever. It's really hard to make a therapy that everybody can take, and it just generally makes them live a little bit longer. And that would be wonderful, but as someone's just sort of getting into this, I think that it's naive. It takes billions and billions of dollars to make really good molecules like that. So if you find something amazing that can actually reverse aging, that you can take it once and you get younger, and then that's something more interesting to invest in, because you can take it once. It may like give you the flu for the weekend, but just the flu and not novel coronavirus 2019. Then that's more interesting. And then obviously, like, send the deck to your friend biologists who work in labs at Stanford or wherever, and like make sure that they can really understand the biology.
Someone's volunteering here to have a lot of decks sent to him. Okay, Gail, do you want to kick us off with the question?
Yeah, so let me weave together the subject we've been talking about.
Is it a question?
It's a question, and the copper on the table. So in order to get any new field to launch, what you need is education. And in particular, you've got to have your investing public or your policy people educated. Because if this, as you guys have pointed out, if the science is known, known in-house, but it's not out there, things aren't going. But what you've got to have is your investment community. And one of the things that we've seen again and again in different fields is where some external event causes a market crash, which means that financing is withdrawn for all kinds of things that are on an upward trajectory, and now you watch a decline, and years before things get back on their feet. What can we do, given the fact that we're facing several things right now that hold that prospect, right, for investment markets tanking? What can we do right now that can buffer out this particular area so that we don't go through another wait of 5 or 6 years, 7 years from where we are right now to getting back to where we are right now?
I don't know. I mean, I'm too positive for the space. I think this is too much in our DNA that this is something we all want. So I think this is, I don't know, somebody else has to answer the question, I think.
Again, it comes down to teams. And if it's a good team, they'll figure out how to pivot and make everything work in the meantime and get back on their feet.
So just 2 comments in answer. One is that getting rid of the worst companies and letting the better fit ones survive is actually healthy for most fields. You know, Google, for example, was born during the .com 1.0 crash, as just an example. And the other thing is, if you take a broader view and don't think of this field by itself, but realize it's embedded within the normal current healthcare system, right? It's the normal current healthcare system that has the wrong approach to treating age-related chronic diseases. So in a money crunch, the hope is, and I don't know whether this will be true, the hope is that these bad siloed approaches to treating chronic disease will fall by the wayside and people will realize that we need these more efficient approaches to attack what happens in midlife.
One thing that might help would be raising as many dedicated funds to aging biology based startups as possible, because if the funding climate turns around and the large private equity firms and public sources stop funding venture for some reason in the near future, hopefully this won't happen, then there could be like a dip like that for a while. But you know, right now the money is flowing, so start VC funds that are dedicated to this purpose, and then at least the money will be locked in.
Hi. So I had a question. You know, you guys talked a lot about European scientists maybe holding, being more kind of purely academic and less kind of commercial in their approach. And I'm curious, because there's also a lot of science that maybe it's not possible to commercialize, right? So things like, you know, there's definitely, you know, the medicine and things like that, but then there's also things like diet and exercise, right? And there's a lot of studies about intermittent fasting and things like that. And I know you guys talked a little bit about food, and I was curious how you guys feel about, you know, how those types of research could be done, that type of research could be done, and like what the framework around funding that is, and what your kind of interests and kind of thoughts around how that could affect the industry and space and movement.
Well, my take is that almost anything can be commercialized if it's useful. And you just have to have a creative way to do it. So, for instance, I actually have a company on fasting, a fasting company, El Nutra, which makes the Prolon diet. If you haven't tried it, you should. It's really, really good. It's better than fasting. And so there's all these, you know, and you can there's, I mean, the fitness industry has been commercialized for years. But I think I get what you're saying about, like, well, maybe there's these things that are not as profitable. And how do you, maybe what you're saying is how do you get more people interested in that? And actually, I think there are people working on that. I didn't invest in them, but there are.
You could also say that's already done. I mean, we already have the best anti-aging drug. We have an incredible anti-aging drug that's been figured out scientifically that can add like 10 or 15 years to your lifespan and increase your health span and do all these things. I mean, people just need to take it. It's called exercise. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. It has a strong effect size. It's high safety. It has aesthetic side effects. It's just really hard to...
Thanks. The tech scene, VC scene has moved into bio. I think, Joe, you were mentioning this in a big way. What are the lessons learned over the last 3 or 4 years, or however long that has been going on, both for VCs and for companies that are trying to raise money? Kind of how has that gone and evolved now that that experiment is a few years old?
Medicinal chemistry is one of the things. These are cool mechanisms. Let's fund them. Oh, that's an amazing new pathway you discovered. And now we need to make a drug that works for that. This ought to work. Oh, it's really hard. Oh, it's kind of toxic. How do we modify it? I don't know. I don't have any medicinal chemists. I need $5 million to outsource it. Or I have probably like 4 startups that I'm advising right now that are all compromising in one way or another in order to succeed at their medicinal chemistry challenges. And I don't think a lot of the tech people saw that coming 4 years ago. They'll get through, but it has to be like a big wedge of your strategy if you're thinking about doing some kind of mainstream therapeutic.
Okay, so let's take one last question over here.
Just have questions about injectables. So it's become very popular around almost in every major city in the country. So what's your take on it?
You're asking about
Injectables. So a lot of people. Do you want me to clarify the question?
There's a huge fraction of the whole pharmaceutical industry now that's switching over to biologics, many of which have to be injected.
So a lot of people right now opening offices everywhere in a major city, including San Francisco, that you can literally inject all missing ingredients you need in your body. So it's vitamin B, it's like complex, it's vitamins of this and that, it's like you would like to have more fluent in your body, and they promise us a lot of beautiful things in your system. So it's the easiest way to for delivery system. So what's your concept on
I would say it comes back down to effect size, and if you look at lifespan studies, most of the things don't have a big lifespan effect. So maybe if you feel better, I don't know, but I think the stuff that we're doing here is a bit more hardcore than the vitamins.
Vitamins. Yeah. Okay. What about the industry? It seems like it's bringing a lot of money.
I mean, frankly, it's this kind of thing that got me irritated at the very beginning of the whole conversation, like in 2012, where I was like, there's already this industry out there of people giving vitamins and like taking alkaline water and like all this stuff that like there's just no basis for. I guess I'm an evidence-based actor where I like show me that something works in some kind of randomized placebo-controlled trial with a significant effect size, and then I get excited and want to figure out how to like bring that into people. Maybe that trial had to be in tissue culture or worms or mice or something first for me to want to put it in people or human cells. But the conversation was so much about there's all these different people in an ecosystem, in this like, I don't even know if I wouldn't call it an ecosystem, of we have this therapy, it's amazing, it's gonna fix you, it's gonna change your life, here's why, and then there's some explanation.
What should you be looking out for if it's the real deal? What do you want to see? What makes you think that's the real deal?
There's evidence that people have been given this therapy and carefully controlled experiments, and it works for them versus the ones that got a placebo and it didn't work for them, and it's measured in this particular way.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, with this, we are going to go on our break, and we're going to have appetizers be passed around, and I encourage all of you speakers to stand in different corners so that people can find you individually to get talking to you. Also, this is a big nudge for you all to fill out the bit.ly/2020 longevity community form, because it live populates this spreadsheet which I shared with you. And so this spreadsheet you can use, go up there and find the name that you're interested in meeting, try to figure them out and how to meet them tonight in the break or later on and how to follow up with them. I will be sending out an email with the information again, but just if you want to have it up and running here, if you fill out the first form, bit.ly/2020 longevity form, that will ask you a bunch of questions. Those questions will then automatically populate this spreadsheet that can be found under bit.ly/2020 longevity community, right? So the second link leads you directly to this beautiful spreadsheet. And I will be having it up here, so if you fill out the form now, your answer will already be popping up there in real time. With that being said, I will open it up for a break. try to find your favorite speakers. We're going to get the bar rolling, and we are going to be meeting here again in about 20 minutes for the lightning talks. All right, see you in a second. Have a lovely, lovely drink.